The more evidence, the better, I say.
I mean, this is so improbable.
That's a bold statement.
I mean, I think that's a fair point, but I didn't make that argument. He did.
Why is that true? Is that a good question? Maybe it's not.
Drew, you're not supposed to ask good questions like
sorry,
that. Don't ask difficult questions.
Bill, jump in here.
I'm Bill the Christian.
And I'm Drew the Skeptic.
You're listening to The Divide.
All right, we're here today with Bob. Thanks for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Bob is a former atheist who deconverted from atheism and became a Christian. So we don't have a particular question to put to you, but we want to ask you to explain why. I guess the question is, why did you deconvert?
Okay. Well, just a little bit of background. I grew up in a non-Christian home, and I mean, we didn't go to church. We did maybe less than a dozen times up through high school. Parents didn't profess any type of faith. We weren't anti anything, though. That wasn't part of our life, I guess.
It was just a non-issue kind of.
Correct. Yeah.
So they didn't speak against Christianity or anything, or other religions, nothing?
Nope.
Okay.
And graduated high school, went on, didn't think much about it either way. I guess I was more agnostic and sometimes atheist, just depended on how much thought I was putting into it, I guess. And
did you feel like, if I may interrupt, did you feel like Christians were a nuisance or annoying, or you sound like you didn't have a negative view of Christians, but
I didn't have a negative view, but I think as I got older, there was a bit of that belief of Christians think they're better than, which I don't think is uncommon, sadly.
Sure.
But eventually met and married my wife, Jen, who is a Christian. And that was, we've been married 12 years now.
So she's been a Christian since before you were married, most
Correct.
of her life? Did she grow up?
Grew up going to church. Professed a faith at a young age. Went to Samford here in Birmingham. So she was behind the scenes praying a lot for me as we first met each other, and certainly as we got married. And then I didn't become a Christian until about 5 years ago.
And you were married for how long before you?
5, 6, 7 years, somewhere around there.
Okay.
Wow.
Did you look at things like, did people give you C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity, or were Christians trying to convert you previous to all that, before even your wife?
Yes, there were different times throughout being from young kid, high school, college. One of my closest friends was a Christian. He's actually a pastor now down in Florida, and we would have some great conversations late into the night from either side, but just could never get there.
In high school even, or later in life?
More in college.
Okay.
High school, there was a couple conversations, but nothing too, like, you got to come to church with me, you got to come do this. I did get a few times, you're going to hell.
Oh.
And that was like a turnoff. Those were from other kids or something. I was like,
not from your best friend, though, I guess.
No,
that would be a bit of strain on the relationship.
It was a different message.
Did you find that when people were confronting you like this, I guess, friends or what have you, in various ways, did you feel like you were sitting in class here learning stuff in university? I'm sure you took some history courses about the Bible. Somewhere it came in, I assume. Maybe it didn't, but I would think usually in university people start hearing things they've never heard about Christianity, about Jesus. We've heard that from other people we've interviewed. Did that have any impact on your attitudes?
I didn't have a lot of that at that point in my life.
You were a math guy.
Right. I think I wasn't interested in developing a worldview at that point. Didn't have much interest in figuring a lot of that stuff out.
Okay.
So I probably avoided more of that.
So through other than your conversations with your best friends, you were in college or out of college before you really got interested. So what did make you sort of turn towards the question of, the big questions? How did we get here? What's the meaning of life? what's the purpose of this?
Right. I think as I started to move towards Christianity, I became more agnostic than atheist, thinking there's something out there, but shoot, I'm not smart enough to know what it is. And I don't know that it would all be put into one being up there.
Was that a tough move? Because it seems like, I'm trying to, I grew up Christian, so it's a little different for me. I kind of went the other way, but if I'm just thinking, if I grew up sort of a-religious, just not even into it, what would bring me to the point where I was interested enough to entertain those questions? And I'm thinking, I guess I'll just leave it to you. What was it? Because I'm having, I would have had trouble leaving the idea that, Christians are just these people that believe this kind of crazy stuff, and I've never needed any of that, and I'm fine, and I'm here. And so what turned your interest toward it?
Well, I think what you just said is very true, and I experienced some of that myself. Of, hey, I'm a pretty good guy. Love my wife, have great kids, good job, life's pretty good. Why would I need that?
You're an adult. You've made it this far.
Right,
that sort of thing,
right. But it's the best way that I can describe it is, you're married, you're in a serious relationship. You know how when
He was talking to Bill, just to be clear.
correct. when there's when you have a fight or a disagreement with your spouse, there's just that separation. There's that space there, and you might still talk, but dinner's not as enjoyable. Or in bed, there's the bed's not as warm. When you leave for work in the morning, there's not that goodbye hug and kiss that really starts your day off on the right foot. And so I would say that life was good, but there was separation there that I maybe couldn't even really identify until I was on the other side. And that separation was what led me to go, there's got to be something more, and I need to start taking it seriously and exploring this.
Wow. So there was just a palpable distance, I guess, between.
So it was more distance than envy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There's an element of seeing people who you can feel the Holy Spirit on them. They're just at peace. There's joy no matter what the situation, and you can just feel an aura around those folks.
So you didn't feel that, but at the time you wouldn't have thought like that.
No, but I saw that and I was like, I want some of that.
So I gotta dig in on that. I gotta ask, how, because obviously at that point you wouldn't have described it as the Holy Spirit is on them. So what did it look like from your non-Christian, your pre-conversion or
Peace.
pre-deconversion, however we're talking
Peace.
about. So you were just like, why are they so settled? Why are they so, unworried, unconcerned?
Yes, there was a peace. There's a comfort in knowing, I would say, and part of my journey. This was maybe 5 to 6 years ago, as I was coming to Christ. Had not professed a faith at all, but I would drive between work appointments, and this would go on for weeks. Have this conversation in my head of, is there a God or is there not a God? If there is a God, why are these things happening? Or if there's not a God, why are these things happening? And it was constant. It was overpowering. I couldn't think of anything else because it would keep coming back to that conversation. And really, it was maddening.
Huh.
So
was one of the biggest things that contributed to your lack of peace, if I can describe it that way, was one of the biggest things that caused this sort of question that you had about what is it, what is there, why can't I figure it out, that sort of thing? Because I dealt with some of that myself, coming the other way, sort of. But did you think that if you solved the sort of riddle that would bring you peace?
I hoped it would.
Yeah.
And
you were still willing to go either way at this point if you said, oh, wow, this Christianity thing is kind of bunk.
Sure.
But I could have a peace about that maybe that would be the solution.
I've made a decision either way, right? I'm settled on it.
Right, okay.
As I was talking, just back and forth in my head, eventually I just told myself, I said, all right, I'm going to just tell myself there's a God, and I believe in it, and that's it. I won't be able, I don't know enough to be able to explain why that means this or that, but I'm just going to tell myself that. And no joke, it was almost overnight. I'd say within 2 days, those conversations in my head, that back and forth, stopped. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's almost like I didn't realize it because it just felt like, But also to your point of what was it I was pursuing, I think there was a part of me deep inside, and I would contend that at some point everybody has this. We know deep in our heart that there's a God there, that He exists, and that He's doing something to lead us to Him at some point.
Well, let me ask you if you thought was there you didn't have a cancer diagnosis, you didn't have, there wasn't sort of an existential health crisis or psychological crisis, it doesn't sound like, correct?
Mm-mm.
That's often, I think, the way it's sort of perceived sometimes. That
Something
people
dramatic, right?
Something dramatic causes someone to suddenly change radically their perception. But in your case, sounds like, if I understand you correctly, it was a little more of there was a positive appeal and attraction rather than that you were being driven to it by some external force, I guess, negative force.
Other than your own angst, I guess.
Yeah,
right?
your internal.
Right.
Yeah,
I would agree with that.
So there was
there was no major event, no crazy thing, but
would you describe it as a kind of existential crisis still, of this back and forth of trying to figure it out, ultimate reality, or it's fine.
I'll have to get back to you on that.
Okay.
Well, the search for peace that you talked about, I guess, to me sounds somewhat existential.
Yeah.
You know, it sounds like you're trying to
What's
deal with things.
What's noticeably lacking, which I think was the case in my own conversion, from atheism toward Christianity, was I didn't go and read the great philosophers on on God, the great arguments for God in history. I wasn't steeped in Christian apologetics to convince me this was all true. And if I understand you correctly, you had a debate that sort of ended. Did you feel like that was a little bit provisional at that time? Like you were believing, but did it
that's a
feel a
good
little
question.
provisional? Because I feel like that was the case for me.
Yeah,
I still felt very open long after my conversion that I could still disbelieve.
And I think I agree with your question exactly. And what I mean by that is, were you trying it out? Maybe not as like I'm still could go either way on this, but like I'm all in. If it works, if I still don't feel any peace, then we'll see what happens.
Like whatever major you declared when you were heading to college.
Exactly. You're in, but you're not sure that it's going to work.
Yeah, I was there. I would, at that same time, and this is over a period of several months, I would take walks in the morning with our dog, and it's very peaceful and quiet, so it gives you some time to really think before the day gets started and stuff gets crazy. And I would pray saying, Lord, I believe, but help my unbelief.
Okay, so this was in the very first. So now, let me just make sure I got this right. You said this was in the last 4 or 5 years. You just decided, okay, I'm tired of having this debate with myself. I'm going to believe, and it's sort of been ever since then.
Correct.
Haven't looked back.
When I was an atheist, I felt I had to know everything, and I had to have something concrete. And there's something very freeing of saying, I just don't know, and I'm okay with that. I'm going to believe this.
That's
and
interesting.
Be okay with it.
We've had some atheists say that about science or other questions of, why do you Christians think you have to know everything? You have to have an answer, and you're saying exactly the opposite. So I think that's interesting.
That's really interesting.
But what I really want to take off on there is, Bill, I want to turn this to you and say, is that your experience as well? That you were saying you didn't understand all the texts of the Bible and the surrounding literature. You just converted, and so what was that like for you when you were an atheist before?
Yeah, so I was younger and unmarried, but in college. But I think there was, and maybe there was for you that you just didn't describe yet, Bob, but I did have an intellectual barrier to the Bible where I really thought the Bible was sort of bunk. And so I I did
That's
have
the word.
a lot
That's the
of,
word of the day, by the way, is bunk.
Is it?
Just if anybody's, yeah, I said it earlier.
Oh yeah,
I was like,
didn't know that.
my girlfriend's gonna make fun of me for that one, just because
There you go.
I use old people words.
So thanks for characterizing my age there, Drew.
No problem.
I think I had a lot of conversations about the Bible around the time that I converted, and I read the Bible, but I had a lot of criticisms of the Bible, and I asked hard questions about the Bible, and I did not think they were all resolved when I converted, and I felt it was provisional in some ways. That it's very similar to what you're saying. Actually, I'm quite surprised by this, to be honest. So I didn't expect this in the interview, but it reminds me a lot of the debate I had in my head back and forth. There was something that was very appealing about belief in God, but I had been so resistant for so long. It was like, I don't really want to do that, and how do I know I'm not tricking myself into believing and all that head game stuff? And
so it was kind of a throwing up your hands in some sense.
I think in a lot of ways I did feel like it was more of a surrender.
Give it a shot.
Yeah, I mean, C.S. Lewis's conversions always resonated with me, that he more surrendered,
right.
And he describes himself, when he converted to theism, not yet to Christianity. He said he was, I think, the most dejected convert in all of England.
Mm-hmm.
And
reluctant
convert. And I very much felt that way. Like, I don't want to seem like I'm one of the crazies.
Yeah.
So, but there's enough of appeal, both intellectually and emotionally, psychologically.
I agree with so much of that. It was a surrender. It was, I'm going to stop fighting. I'm going to stop fighting God. I'm just going to give in. I'm going to surrender, and Lord, I'm yours. That was very freeing.
Also, let me just interject this real quick. I also have never felt as a Christian the way I feel. I think some Christians tend to seem to act, or at least they appear to think this way, that I now know it all because I'm a Christian.
Right.
I very much had the opposite experience, where it was more like, now is the beginning of trying to understand things, and I feel like I've been working on that for 20 years.
I think it's interesting that both of you express that, not just from a I don't need to know everything kind of point of view, but just from a, okay, I don't even have a full knowledge of why I'm doing this. Like, I don't have all the answers that I feel like I would like to have, but I'm just going to go for it, sort of. But let me take another turn on this, because this is what's really interesting to me, is that I grew up Christian. Like, I was in church from the day I was born. I was, I had several little mini, prayers of salvation when I was a kid, because I was like, I'm just not sure if I did it right. I was very, like, from the age of 3, 4, 5, it was very into all of that, and grew up in Bible studies, grew up in going to youth group on Wednesday nights and all that. So it was a huge, huge part of my life. And then, similar to your age, so in college, one of the things I did was I would send out a Bible verse to all my friends every week, and my little commentary about it, and I was like this sort of wannabe pastor in training or something. But after college and in my 20s, sort of in the same time frame I think you're talking about, Bob, I started to have these same sort of questions, it sounds like you did, which were, let's, like, reasoning from first principles, like reasoning, like, not just, oh, I've always been told this, but like, what have I experienced and what have I seen and what can I see? I started to question, whether or not I really had everything figured out myself. And it's funny how it kind of parallels or perpendiculars or whatever you would say with what both of you are saying, actually, is there was this sort of questioning all the same questions, and then ending up going, well, I don't feel like I have a reason to continue believing what I've always believed. It's just funny how we all came to different conclusions.
And highly individualized. Meaning it doesn't matter if you're surrounded by a bunch of people who think, well, I shouldn't say it doesn't matter, because you were married to somebody and that mattered, who was a Christian. But I mean, you're in other words, what's going on in your head is what's going on in your own head, and I don't think anyone can put Humpty Dumpty back up on the wall for you.
That's true. It's not like,
I couldn't have been there, Drew, to save your faith.
Well, and I don't think any of us are like, you know, anti anything.
Yeah.
You know, like
Yeah.
I don't think the three of us were just trying to buck the trends and be different. I think we
Yeah.
were just really just going through a
Yeah.
journey of trying to figure out what it all means.
To be clear, I meant cutting both ways. If I were myself an atheist turning toward religion, an atheist friend might have said, "Don't go."
What are you doing? Yeah.
I had some resistance among some friends as well. So
Absolutely.
it's they couldn't have stopped that. In one sense, I think, because it's so.
For me, I would say that it all happens in God's timing, and I would have loved for it to have happened earlier, but I don't think that was my story or what God had intended.
Have you since then? It's been 4 or 5 years. 5 years, I think you said. Have you delved a little more into? Because I'm sure you've still had I'm sure you've had an occasional doubt. You know, is this all still real? Have you felt yourself a little more motivated to look at some defense of your beliefs and so on, more than you
Sure.
did before, even defending sort of your
Sure.
non-belief?
It's interesting from this side. I have explored more my belief than my unbelief.
Mm-hmm.
And that has only helped to strengthen my resolve in there's a God, I'm not it. Jesus Christ is the Son of God, and He died for my sins. When I start looking at historical records or manuscripts or copies of and how close they were dated to relative to other ancient philosophers, etc., those things help to strengthen that from I'd say a secular history point of view, but really most of it I feel in my own heart with my own experience and asking God to show me things and reveal things to me in His perfect timing.
And Drew, I guess you have also thought a lot more about your faith, probably, or non-belief. That aspect, wouldn't you say, since the change?
You know, I think it's something that was always a huge thing for me. I was never, I kind of joke about going back to literally preschool and elementary school, always wondering, like, am I doing this right? Am I, there were always questions for me of like, did I truly believe? Like, even just knowing myself, but then also just like, well, why? And like, what is it that, is it just sort of, like, for me, it wasn't like the desire to believe and to have peace and all that was like, yeah, but I want to know what's real. And I mean, I think you would say that that's real to you now. Like, you can perceive that. Mm-hmm. And I would just say that I never perceived that. I never really had sure, I thought I did sometimes, but like when I sort of looked a little deeper, I was like, it's funny how the only times that I can recall, feeling like I had an experience with God of any kind are the times that I was doing something, singing a praise song in church, like maybe it was the air conditioner giving me chill bump. There was always a catalyst for that other than just like
you perceived God
a
from the
real
outside
perception
was really
of Him coming at me versus the other way. I always felt like I was reaching out, and then at the very end, it was just like I'm begging for this experience and not seeing it, and I'm like, yeah, I think I was just kind of imagining it all the whole time.
That's interesting. I've been a little envious of people who have been baptized or come to faith, and it's an immediate
Watershed moment.
Yes.
Yeah.
And man, that's really neat. Mine, I feel, has been more of a slow burn to a fire. But it's interesting that you say it that way because I always wanted that like, and I've had more of those feelings and experiences. But there's some friends who I've talked to, and it's like, man, once the day they were baptized, it was like their whole world changed immediately coming up out of the water.
Well, what is most interesting to me is the peace that you talked about, because I think most people would say they have that experience, and they have doubts, but they have a sense, a peace about what they're doing, what they believe is right, and as someone who truly did believe that, I never had that peace.
But wouldn't you say you had so I'm not questioning that you didn't have that peace, but wouldn't there have been something to the sort of intellectual basis or framework to being able to put things generally in order. Like there's grounding for morality, there's grounding for rational thinking.
Oh, I'm not
and
saying
things
that
like
there's
that.
no evidence for Christianity, like in favor of Christianity.
I meant only that
I'm
it's
just saying-
orienting. I meant that that's orienting in a way that when that's removed, I would think, it's. And I didn't feel like I was disoriented when I was an atheist, but I'm just saying by contrast, there are some big things that get settled if you're a theist, right?
Oh, well, I'll say, in the first years of sort of quitting my, religious practice, it was very disconcerting because I was like, not only, I wouldn't say that I had questions about like, well, how do I even know that 2 + 2 = 4 now? Because there's no authority giver for the, how do we know that our minds work? I didn't have these kind of like almost, asylum-ish thoughts, but I did have very like serious emotional struggles of like, am I going to go to hell if I give up on this? Like, what's going to happen? And it was very troubling,
Did you have Bob, any similar thing when you became a Christian? Like I had some friends, it became immediately difficult with people that I knew before.
But it was relationships,
with a lot of people.
right? I mean,
relationships.
You didn't have any internal, like, or did you? I don't know. Maybe, were you like worried that you might be making a huge mistake?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
But, I was a slow burn.
Yeah.
So, but I would say that it wasn't real long lasting, and
No, I don't think I've experienced anything like that, or none that I'm aware of yet. I try to stay off social media, so I don't know.
Well, I mean, it's all people's social circles.
It
Obviously
depends.
Can have
Yeah.
a big
It sounds like you had
impact
more
on-
people dragging you towards it.
Well, and that's exactly
than
it.
Bill did.
My circle of friends and my community are more believers, and even before I was seriously walking down the path of Christianity, I would go to church with Jen to support her as my wife. And I'll tell you what, we were at a church where they celebrated communion every Sunday, and that's a very odd feeling, being what I perceived was the only person sitting in the pew while everybody else gets up.
That is awkward.
And my thought was everyone's looking at me, talking about or thinking, oh, look at that atheist over there.
I've been there, yeah.
And then now, when I am taking communion and I see somebody who didn't get up, I pray. I just hope that they're touched in the same way I was. Nothing beyond. Love that person. Hope that they're.
It's interesting because so many people we talk to have such a negative view of Christians, and they say a lot of things that are, I think, often true about Christians, because Christians are human beings and do a lot of dumb things and say dumb things. And but it's interesting to me for your spending time with so many Christians that it was actually more of a catalyst. It seems like it was more of a magnet than it was a repulsion.
Absolutely.
In your case, so speaks
seems
well of the group that you were connected to, I guess.
It seems to, in a lot of my conversations with people, whether atheist or not, is a lot of religion or Christianity is distorted by people, not necessarily by what's in the Bible, but people and the way we interpret things or act upon things or say things towards others.
I think, we don't have to wrap up right now, but I am starting to think about where the divide is.
Yeah.
And, it's funny. In some ways, it's painfully obvious. It's like you guys, your Christianity looks like this. Mine never really did.
Yeah.
But, it leads me to the sort of the deeper question of like, why? Why is that? What,
Yeah.
What happened? What is happening? It's.
Well, it's interesting that he didn't say things like, well, or maybe you did say this and I missed it, but like specific prayers got answered. That's one thing I hear a lot from atheists is, well, you can pray or not pray, it really doesn't matter. But I've heard that a lot, that you can test prayers.
I'm not sure I'm following.
Well, meaning he didn't say, oh, well, I prayed 3 things.
Oh, and they all got
answered,
so
and that made me know. In other words, I'm showing sort of that's something that was.
You want an example?
Huh?
I can give you an example.
Oh, you had a prayer that was answered.
I can give you an example.
Okay. Well, no. Let's just say that actually was then important in your case, because I remember praying when I was in the darkness of my room and thinking, this is the first time I've talked to God other than when it was at the end of a football game.
This was after you had first converted?
I hadn't converted yet, and I was just for the first time thinking, well,
let me test out this prayer
if God
thing.
is real, let me test this out. Would you do this, that, and the other? And I would throw things out like tests of what about this, that, and the other. And honestly, they're so unbelievably embarrassing. I probably could only tell my wife ever what they were. That were my litmus tests.
I have a goal now for the rest of the episodes of this podcast.
You'll
get there.
Because, it's interesting. What's interesting, just thinking back on it, is, it wasn't like God come down from heaven and show yourself. Just be sitting, out in the courtyard on the bench tomorrow morning or something. It was way more
specific,
deeply
and embarrassing.
specific, personal things to me.
Yeah.
And I think that's interesting.
And so, but your point is that those never got answered, and yet you still, became.
Yeah,
a
I
Christian.
became a believer despite that. Is what my point is. It was really despite that, and the things that stand out to me now were bigger things like the value of truth in the Christian communities I was interacting with, where I was kind of a habitual liar, and felt I would lie at whatever I needed to get what I wanted, if I felt like I could get away with it. There was no constraint on my lying. And I could tell these people really valued truth. And that really had an impact on me, and, things like that.
Well, getting back to the divide, I think, it's going to have to be a little unsatisfactory for me, because I would love to know, because, I think you guys are both very different individuals. You're not of an ilk that is just, credulous or something, and you're just following this Christian path without thinking about it. You're both very thoughtful guys, and yet I had the same path, and I came down on a different conclusion, and had sort of a different, I don't know, we didn't really talk about, Bill, where you stand on the whole being at peace thing, and all, and I don't think that's really the crucial element of this, but there is some I
think that's become
in the way
more
that
important for me the more I've progressed in my own thinking since I became a Christian. That where I've had moments where I've thought, I'm doubting, or I wonder, is it really ultimately true? I would say that does play a role in maybe maintaining my faith. That I see it very much as you have door number one, door number two. And door number one seems a whole lot more appealing to me. There's a famous scene, where Jesus says to his disciples after he's preached a sermon, and it was kind of awkward because he talked about eating his flesh. And a bunch of people abandoned him. They didn't follow him anymore. And he turned to the 12 or whatever, and he said, "Do you want to go away also?" And Peter speaks up and he says, "Well, to whom shall we go?" And I do think that's been a bigger part. At times, I wouldn't say it characterizes my normal weekly experience, but at times it has. And as I've progressed in really trying to think through the nature of belief and the nature of God, and even for my part, a little more of a historical, philosophical probing of all that stuff, that's played a role.
I had a friend who basically said that to me, to whom shall you go? What are you? And I said, well, just, the truth. I'm not I'm not going to believe something because I have no alternative,
Right.
But I'm not trying to, I don't want to debate. I just do think it's really interesting how, you would see one thing and go down this path, and I would see the same thing and just go a different way.
In a very different, it's very, very clear to me, I'm sure you will feel this way, Bob, that people who grow up in Christianity definitely, there is something that it's a little different perspective than I have. And I had some Catholic exposure when I was very young, very young. But I mean, basically, it was we were non-religious mostly. I think it's.
I mean, I think the divide's a little deeper than that, than just you guys came at it from non-Christianity and I the opposite. But it's very interesting. I guess we're going to have to wrap up. But it's interesting to me to talk about these things. And I really appreciate you talking with us, Bob.
I enjoyed it.
I'll just add one thing about the divide that for me has been important. I like to check my ideas against things outside of Christianity. So there's a famous Socratic dialogue or a Platonic dialogue where the guy who's sort of representing Plato's voice for all practical purposes is they're entertaining the different ways you can look at ultimate reality. It's not about God per se, but it touches on what ultimately becomes the distinction between theism and non-theism. And there's just one, and the guy who's sort of the voice of Plato just says, he just stops the other person and says, it can't be that. I mean, because if it's that alternative, it would mean the whole thing is chaos. The whole thing we live in is chaos. And he just sets it aside and says, but it can't be that. And I think that's how I sort of feel, even at a sort of philosophical level now. I didn't feel that initially, but that would be my sort of attempt to try and check it. But
I get that, and that's why I alluded to, like when I sort of began to stop believing, I didn't have this, oh my gosh, how is 2 + 2 equal to 4?
Yeah.
You would think that, okay, there's no creator bulwarking my value systems or anything. Everything's going to come crashing down. I'm just going to murder people all the time, but it just doesn't happen that way.
I think one part about the divide is how mysterious that divide is. I think that's one thing that really stands out to me.
I'd agree with that. I mean, you and I agree on so many things, and
Yeah.
it sounds like Bob, we agree on a lot of things. I've known you about 30 minutes, and I've known Bill for years, but still, it is amazing how mysterious that whatever it is.
That real
difference.
fork between belief and non-belief, which you're that going back and forth, which all of us have experienced. Every one of us has experienced that.
Yeah, that's what.
And that mystery of at what point does the rubber band snap, and the ball goes in one direction versus another is definitely mysterious.
It is. Well, this
Bob,
has been
thanks.
great.
Thanks
Yeah.
for being
Enjoyed it.
for being here. And I am Bill the Christian.
And I'm Drew the Skeptic. Thanks for listening.
The Divide is produced by Alan and Ben Hawbrooks and edited by John Workman. Dalton Reed handles IT. Join us for further discussion on this topic at our subreddit, TheDividebyiPUB. To learn more about other episodes and who we are, check out ipub.org/thedivide. See you next time on The Divide.